Welcome back. First, I want to start off by apologizing for the trouble last week. Apparently, I overestimated the abilities of my iPad, and the as a result, missing my laptop had some trouble while I was away at a conference. But hopefully, we were able to get through that. Nobody notified me that they couldn't get to the audio file, so I'm operating on the assumption that everybody was able to get to the lecture. This week we're going to talk about the education of women in American higher education, historically speaking. This is a very brief discussion of the topic. Whole books have been written on this, and fascinating books, actually. So we're just going to go over a few of the different things, different aspects of women in higher ed in America. We're going to start off with the first time that a woman was actually considered, and I don't know if you'd say considered for admission to Yale, but a woman in 1783 by the name of Lucinda Foote, a 12-year-old, was allowed to sit for the entrance exams at Yale, passed them all with flying colors, but because she was female, her admission was denied. They sent her a letter that said that you meet all the standards, but because you are, the one standard that you do not meet is gender. So they openly denied her on the basis of gender. And of course that was before all the non-discrimination laws were in place. So that was kind of the start of it all. Colonialists in early America viewed women as intellectually inferior and frankly not worth educating. They really believed that the woman's place was in the home, and this came straight out of Europe, so that ideal was still in place. It was Benjamin Rush who really sought to establish an American ideal of women in higher education and sought to open the doors. He saw that, or he believed rather, that the freedom for women to pursue higher education was really an American idea, and that's why he believed it was so important. He also believed that, the reason that few women were educated was really a matter of necessity. There was a lot to do with regard to settling and conquering the new land. Men needed the women to work alongside them to capitalize on the opportunities with plentiful land, agriculture, digging for gold, silver, etc. There was just so much opportunity that the men needed the women to work right alongside them. This ideal continued for a long time. It turned into kind of an agrarian ideal. Just as a personal example, I know my maternal grandmother, my grandparents on my mother's side were farmers, and they had a lot of kids so that they would have plenty of farm hands. They had 7 sons and my mom. And my grandmother followed along with this agrarian ideal, and she would work in the cotton fields, work in the corn fields, a lot of the time while she was pregnant, but work alongside my grandfather. So that idea of the role of women continued in some form for a long, long time, from colonial times on into the 20th century. Also, American women were seen as being responsible for preparing young men to be active in civic affairs. And this was something that was not required in European culture, because in the European culture, out of which the colonialists had come, in that European culture, the general public was not free to participate in governing affairs or civic affairs. So as a result, they just didn't think about that. Then you get to America, and there's this idea that women need to educate the young men, to raise the young men to be productive members of society. Then we get into the frontier equality, the idea that, and this really empowered women to seek opportunities to empower them, to better themselves. And this movement really was the catalyst for access to higher ed. The idea that women were just as capable as men. That was the idea of the frontier equality. Women had been working alongside men to settle this new land, to conquer this land. And so as a result, we ended up with this idea that women all of a sudden realizing, you know what, I can do better. I can learn new things. I can conquer new ideas. And so that gave rise to the idea of women wanting to get educated. There were a few things that preceded and also helped empower women to seek access to higher education. One was Antoinette Brown obtaining the right to be a pastor in 1847 in New York. Amelia Bloomer freeing women from what was known as the hobbling skirts. And you women may know more about the hobbling skirts than I do. But basically, she took it off and started wearing looser fitting clothing so that she could keep up with the men and in pace. And that happened in 1851. And then Lucy Stone, now here's an interesting thing, and we see some things today. Lucy Stone in 1855 succeeded in having the word obey removed from her marriage vows before she got married to a pastor in 1855. Even today, we see the traditional marriage vows many times will include the word obey. And of course, that word is used by the woman, not by the man. So that's another part of colonial culture that that went away and that started to catalyze the idea of women getting educated. Higher education for women was formally preceded by the idea of the female seminaries, and these were really little more than finishing schools. But it started in 1837 with Oberlin College admitting 4 women, which was also the start of the coeducational movement in higher education. Before the Civil War, less than 6 colleges were coeducational. The first women's college was Georgia Female College in Macon, Georgia. That was chartered in 1836. They opened in 1839. But then we have Catherine Beecher. Now, Catherine Beecher in 1851 basically sounded the alarm and said the women's colleges are nothing more than high schools. They don't offer the curriculum or features or amenities of a real college, of what we see in the men's colleges. And so Catherine Beecher started what was called the American Women's Education Association, and their primary purpose was to enforce standards for women's colleges. The availability of educational opportunity for women swelled after the Civil War, and that was the result of 2 things. One was the federal government passing the Morrill Act and establishing the land-grant colleges, which included access for women. And then we have state universities where coeducation took hold. And this primarily happened in the West. We'll talk about here in just a little bit. It was University of Iowa in 1855 started it off. University of Wisconsin followed suit in 1863. Then we see it happening in Indiana, Missouri, Michigan, and California. And that's where the state universities embrace the idea of coeducation, of mingling men and women in higher education pursuits. The Civil War was a real catalyst for education for women, and the reason is the Civil War was where we saw the beginning of Rosie the Riveter. You're probably familiar during World War II, the number of men who left to go fight meant that there were a number of women who had to go work in the factories to build the airplanes, tanks, jeeps, etc. For the war effort, and they became known as Rosie the Riveter. This actually was not a new thing. It was in the Civil War when this started. Women were pulled out of their homemaker roles, and they were required to work hard on their ranches, plantations, farms, etc., factories. And what this did was it showed the women that they could develop skills, and they could run businesses, they could produce, etc. And it laid the foundation for a demand for educational opportunity because it empowered them and made them aware of their ability to accomplish and to make things happen. In 1860, Matthew Vassar announced his intention to found a women's college. The big difference was that this wasn't just going to be another finishing school. Vassar stated, and you're probably familiar with Vassar College. Vassar stated that this was going to be a real college, not limited to offering courses for, quote, female needs, which was cooking, homemaking, sewing, finishing school, proper etiquette, etc. Vassar wanted to offer the same curriculum that was offered at the men's schools. Smith and Wellesley colleges followed suit, and all three of them worked to provide the same broad curriculum that was provided to the men, and moved away from the idea of women being taught home economics as their primary curriculum. And it's interesting, the idea of home economics survived for a long, long time. In fact, when I was an undergraduate at Texas Tech University in the early 90s, it was right before, just a few years before I got there, that the college where I got my degree, it was the College of Human Sciences at Texas Tech, had previously been the College of Home Economics. And that's where you had the fields of family studies, human development, early childhood education, nutrition, family financial planning, and a few others. But it was interesting how this ideal continued for a long, long time, even though we see the beginning movement right after the Civil War to do away with it. By 1870, Sophia Smith's will was made known, which is where Smith College was started or established with the money from her will. In 1888, Bryn Mawr College was formed for women in Philadelphia. And the important thing here is that Bryn Mawr, when it was founded, the important aspect of it was that they were going to follow the model that had been established by Johns Hopkins. Research intensive, high standards kind of a place. And so that was a very important step for women. The next step was the academies, the finishing schools, the high schools that were starting to move to collegiate status, and implementing college-level coursework, college requirements, etc., to become women's colleges. Now, the other thing is the difference between coordinate education versus co-educational programs. A number of schools did not want to go co-ed. They didn't want to offer spaces for women on their campuses. So they started what was known as the coordinate education. We see this at Harvard in 1879. Elizabeth Agassiz, Agassiz, started what was known in slang as the Harvard Annex. And it later became Radcliffe College. And this was a group of faculty who offered their classes to women off campus and after normal hours. And they did this in order to provide opportunities for women. We see this at Columbia, which gave birth to Barnard College, Sophie Newcomb College at Tulane University, Pembroke at Brown, Jackson at Tufts, and Flora Stone Mather at Western Reserve University. So that was really the interesting thing there. I'm going to cut this off, and then I'll come back to this since YouTube only allows us to record 15 minutes at a time. And so we'll come back with part 2 here in just a moment.